Okay. Well, hello, Kevin, and thank you so much for being our guest today in United Way of Western Connecticut's 5-day equity challenge in pursuit of equity in education. Today, we're exploring your perspective as a leader of one of the largest public school systems in the state and your vision for continuing to pursue educational equity for students and family. What are you doing at a systems level to ensure that educators and staff are sensitive to racial issues, especially in such a diverse district?
So this is an ongoing commitment from the district. One, I believe it was in my second year in the school district, and as part of the strategic planning effort. Um, and I'm going to start here, Isabel, because I think this is appropriate. We had the board at a district and policy level approve an equity, diversity, and inclusion policy. It was important, at least from my perspective, to make sure that the board was on the same page with our work, and it helped us and helped give us the leverage regarding our efforts to provide professional development for staff, any improvements in curriculum we were going to make. We wanted to make sure it was coming from the top, make sure it was coming from the superintendent's office, and that we had the foundation to help drive the changes we needed to make sure experience in his district reflected our school community. And so just getting back, I think, a little bit more directly to the sensitive to racial issues conversation. In my first and second year prior to the pandemic, we hired someone from NYU. We partnered with someone from NYU to work with our administrators across the entire system, given their responsibility and sphere of influence with staff and how they encounter our school community. And part of that training was bias training. Part of that training was sensitivity to racial issues. Part of that training was, making sure that anyone who walked through our door, regardless of how they identified, that our schools were welcoming for all. Certainly not perfect. And I think those hours, those days, those weeks, those months of training, I think we learned a lot about ourselves during that process. It was an awkward entry point into the district, as I myself was just beginning to develop relationships with principals, but I think it also gave them an idea of where I stood in terms of equity and how important it was to make sure our schools were welcoming for all of our kids and all of our families. And I think from that foundation, we were able to grow as a community. And I think if nothing else, if there's nothing else, I think they had a certain level of respect and understood where I came from in that regard. The systems, they were able to begin to grow from there, and we're building them every day. And I say that because the strategic plan that we had developed, and it's really a strategic direction, Isabel, it's not even a plan yet because it's yet to be fully implemented, although we've already checked off a lot of boxes. But now that we're on, I would like to think, on the other side of the pandemic, it needs to be revisited. That's a whole other story. But there are a lot of things that we're starting to implement in regard to curriculum updates. The curriculum updates are an offshoot of our Portrait of a Graduate, in which we've had significant community engagement. That Portrait of a Graduate is embedded and principled through equity. And that's important for us in making sure that there are equitable experiences for kids and access to career-like pathways and programs. And so that pathway is leading to the work that we're doing at this new high school that we're launching. And we're not doing it just because we need space. We're not doing it just because we want a pretty building. We're doing it because we want to create equitable experiences for kids throughout this district. And so certainly that's the 9-12 part, but then we will be revisiting K-8 to make sure kids are prepared and ready to launch themselves into these careers or postgraduate, post-high school education. And so we're really serious about it. We're serious about our curriculum being revised to make sure our kids can see themselves in the work. Our books and nonfiction and fiction that has been shared with kids have changed, and kids can begin to see themselves in the literature. And these are things that are happening at the K-5 level significantly. And I think those are some of the systems, that are beginning to change. And the conversations we had was not just with administrators, but we also got down to our coaches, and coaches talking to them about their sphere of influence and their responsibility when developing curriculum and being mindful of the kids who are in front of this curriculum, and that they have responsibility to those kids and those families, and their ethnicities and their culture, and making sure that we are mindful of those things and their experiences when putting together curriculum. So when talking at systems, we were intentional about making sure those folks are at the table. In fact, we've even come up with a rubric to make sure that we've checked a number of boxes before we've agreed upon what these educational experiences are going to look like. So we've worked really hard at it. Dr. Casimiro has taken this work seriously, and has worked with our STEM coordinator and humanities coordinator to make sure that we continue to facilitate this in the right direction. So I'm excited about the work that it's still a lot of work to do. This is an ongoing work for us. It's like a box that'll never be fully checked, and that's okay. But I think from a systemic standpoint, we're definitely working and going in the right direction.
That's excellent. That's certainly quite a vision for the district. We know that the elected Board of Ed plays an important role in the strategic vision of the district. Can you share a little bit about what measures the Board of Ed is putting in place or prioritizing to ensure their own cultural competencies and racial sensitivities in their work?
Yes. So I think I can answer 2 out of 3 of those bullet points in that question. And one of them, which is important for me, and I think also important for the board, and that is the approval of that policy. And the approval of that policy was at the end of the 2019 school year, I believe, in December, not the school year, but the end of the year. And approving that equity policy was critical for us. And it helped to ensure that annually we're providing professional development relative to racial equity and racial issues in the district. It's a policy that pushes upon a district to make sure there are systems in place that we're disaggregating and aggregating data with a lens, through an equity lens. It's a policy that helps to ensure that we are recruiting, that we're continuing to try to find folks of color to represent our school district. And the measures are actually incorporated in the superintendent goals. And those measures are also incorporated in the board goals. I can't tell you that every year the board goals are going to represent these pieces of equity, but I can tell you as part of their board training with CAPS or CABE, that CABE is always going to come in and speak to issues relative to equity. I shouldn't say always, but that's certainly going to happen right now during these times. That's going to be a priority for them when talking about board goals. So I think as long as that's happening and as long as this policy is in place, I think it's always going to be at front and center as part of their goals and their responsibilities. So I think that's really helpful to this process.
That's great, Kevin. The other group that's really central to all of this, of course, is parents. Having the parent voice at the table is so important. Can you talk a little bit about what the district is doing to improve and approach families and parents, improving family engagement and prioritizing that family voice?
Yeah. I think in the short time I've been here, Isabel, I think we've gotten better at this, and not because I've necessarily led that effort. Although I'm trying to do my part with communications to families, particularly, on the heels of, I'm hoping, an ending pandemic and making sure our families are involved and kind of in touch with what's going on in the schools. I think my communications are down to once per month now, where we were every week leading into the opening of the school, and then every 2 weeks once the school's open. But it's my intention to continue to communicate from my desk at the minimum once per month. But we also recognize, particularly given the success we had with reaching families of the pandemic, we feel like we need to be more strategic post-pandemic. And I feel like we're in post-pandemic mode right now that our kids are back in school. We learned during remote learning that we can actually contact families. We learned during remote learning that we can engage all of our families, if not all, probably a significant number of them than we had before. We learned that at Parents Teachers Night, when years past, maybe we only had 1 or 2% of our families actually come and participate in person. That increased to 10, 15%. We had hundreds of families participate in Parent Teachers Night during the pandemic because all of a sudden they had access to teachers in ways they didn't have access before. We are looking to capitalize on those partnerships, those relationships that we built with families during the pandemic. So one of those ways, and I'm not suggesting this is the silver bullet, but one of those ways we're looking at further connecting with our families is through this platform called Parent Square. And it's essentially a social media-like platform for educators. I will start from my office because quite frankly, the demands on our teachers and administrators is significant right now. So I'm going to start in my office with communications. It's already connected to our student management system. So I have everyone's phone number and address and email address. And our families will be able to elect how they want to receive my messages. Text message, email, do they want to receive all of their messages in a day, just in case there's multiple messages coming from schools. And so if schools are going to be closed, I will populate their email or their text message. If I have an announcement regarding I'm visiting schools and there's something amazing going on at South Street or Great Plain, I can take pictures and populate it, send that to all my families. If we're bringing in a new personnel that I want to announce to the entire district, Parent Square could be my platform to do that. And it also can be two-way. Like any social media platform, it's two-way opportunity. And so it's a platform that I'll be encouraging my principals to use with their parent community, but even more importantly, a platform that I'll be encouraging our teachers to use with their families. So we're seeing this as an opportunity to capitalize on, again, the relationships we've made and partnerships we've made with families. I'm really hopeful that our families will see this as a even greater bridge to our schools and into our classrooms, particularly since they can't visit in person. And so I'm really hoping this is going to be helpful. Last but not least, we prioritize hiring family liaisons at all of our schools this year. And so the finding people has been a struggle, but of our schools, I think we have 19 schools, 20 schools now in the district. We've hired, I believe, 9 people so far. And this is, one of those other priorities that, again, to help with parent and family engagement, we've made sure that all of the people we hire are at least bilingual, if not trilingual, to make sure all of our families feel welcome and have access to our schools. So we are trying in this regard, and this has certainly been a priority for us because we really need to improve our communication here in district.
That's excellent, Kevin. It sounds like you've learned a lot coming out of the pandemic. Any final thoughts before we close out today's conversation?
Final thoughts. One, I just want to say it is amazing working with United Way as a partner. And I can't thank you enough for the support, particularly during the pandemic, that the United Way provided our schools, our parents, our school community. I think we learned a lot about each other during the height of the pandemic. And it's nice to know during the crisis, we can pick up the phone and call each other. So I just want to thank you. And I'm just happy to be in Danbury and just know that I have partners like you to make sure we're meeting the needs of our kids and our families. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. We are grateful for your support as well, and always a pleasure to partner with our schools.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.